So the question too then becomes, well, what do you consider safe? Or put another way, what do you consider to be not risky at all? And here's what consumers tell us. Yeah, restaurant takeout, I'm good. Restaurant delivery, I'm good. But as you go further down the list, you can see where there is some perceived risk, right? The notion of assembled to order food, sort of like where you, like a fast casual place where you go in the line and then the staff puts together, your food, your sandwich, your bowl, whatever, in front of you, is thought to be, I guess, riskier significantly than getting takeout or delivery. As we go further down the list, you can see that buffet restaurants are obviously the most perceived to be risky. All that self-serve stuff, essentially. And when we ask consumers, what are foods that you think will boost your immunity? This is what they told us. So this is the percentage of consumers that believe these various types of food items will help boost their immunity. Marie, this is your field of expertise as a registered dietitian. Does anything jump out to you when you see these numbers?
I think what jumps out to me is I think it's encouraging to see that consumers are largely on point here, that they're picking foods that inherently have the nutrients that we need to help with our immunity. So those first four, the citrus fruits and leafy greens and superfoods, are all super high in vitamin C, which I think is probably the longest standing nutrient that we know helps with our immunity. And then also notably, fish is maybe, 8th or 9th on this list, and it's the first animal protein that's mentioned. And fish is a great immunity food. So fish has omega-3s which help with inflammation. Fatty fish like salmon and sardines also have some vitamin D, which we know is particularly important in this time of COVID-19. So a good list, very accurate, I would say.
Yeah. And then if we take the list one step further and we look at what nutrients consumers think will boost their immunity, here's what you see. And, to me, this was actually surprising that people had any idea what the heck these things even were, which means they've actually been paying a lot closer attention to food and nutrition recently than they have historically. Typically, if you ask consumers, what's the difference between this and this and this, they don't really know. But I was really sort of shocked to see how much separation there was between vitamin C and vitamin D and the rest. I don't know, Marie, if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, something I think is really interesting to build on that is medical researchers would agree with consumers here. And actually a really interesting dialogue that's happening is a group of researchers are advising our health authorities to, for the first time in several years, consider increasing the recommended dietary allowance for those two nutrients in particular, vitamin C and vitamin D. So, the saying is that immunity is more important now than perhaps it's ever been. And that's enough so that medical authorities are recommending that we maybe have up to double the amount of vitamin C or vitamin D that we used to. So we'll see if that conversation continues, but right now that's a group of folks from the US and the UK, and I think Australia and New Zealand and some European countries.
So is that something that's made the news much, the change in daily allowances?
Well, the change hasn't happened yet. It's just a discussion that's starting. So we'll see what happens. I know for some countries, it's been longer for them that they've kind of revisited these dietary allowances and thought about how we might benefit from having more of these nutrients. So we'll see what happens. Yeah. I think also interestingly is we see probiotics on that list, which I believe more people understand today that our gut is our biggest immunity organ. So this whole notion of eating for gut health and having probiotics and prebiotics, I think that conversation will continue as well.
One of the things that's been a saving grace for restaurants during this period and has caused some restaurants to even see positive sales trends has been the launch or the concentration around family meals. So we want to understand family meals in a little more detail. And the first question is, what do you actually want to have in your family meal? What should the components be? Do people want to just have something that's sort of the entree only, but in a family-sized portion? Do they want an entree along with an appetizer and a side, or do they want a dessert included there as well? Well, not many people just want the entree, right? Just 1 in 5 want only the entree. It seems like you have to have multiple components at a minimum. And at an absolute minimum, it's got to be an entree with some sort of a side or an appetizer. That's the bare minimum, and that's probably the basic bundle. But you have a third that says, you know what, just throw dessert in that thing too. And perhaps the best way of doing that is basic bundle, entree with an appetizer side, and then have an option to include dessert as well. If you do that, you will capture the majority of the market. And in terms of the types of sort of themes that people want represented in their family meal, comfort foods, yes, are at the top of that list. And we've seen this pretty consistently, that people have pivoted toward comfort foods in the short run. Our research suggests that this is not going to be an enduring long-term phenomenon, that there will be a return to other types of foods. And you start seeing it already here, that build your own foods, where you're like customizing your own burrito or bowl or sandwich, or sort of like building an item from the ground up. That's super popular, as well as healthy options too. So look at this. Healthy, better for you in the context of a family meal scores higher than indulgent foods. But we know from all the other research we've done that when we say, hey, when you finally go back out into a restaurant for the first time, do you want something healthy or indulgent? The vast majority said indulgent. But in the context of a family meal, it's something for the entire household, preference tilts back toward healthy. And that might be something we can exploit, because as we look at the family meals that a lot of chains have done recently, there aren't that many sort of explicitly healthy options in there yet. But it seems like there's certainly some appetite for that. So again, while comfort's at the top of the list, remember that appetite that we have as Americans is very, very diverse, and there's lots of opportunities for more types of family meals going forward. Let's look at this demographically by generation for a bit. So Gen Zers, less interested in comfort foods. Boomers, less interested in those build your own. Millennials are the ones that really love those build your own platforms. Healthy peaks with millennials and Gen Xers. Indulgent also peaks with millennials and Gen Xers at the opposite end of the spectrum. So you see a bifurcation there. Trendy foods, more with millennials than any other group. And this actually is very consistent with what we've seen about consumers overall, that millennials are the peak generation for folks that really want to try trendy stuff. Like for a long time, it looked like, oh yeah, each subsequent consumer generation, they're all more progressive than the last. It's not true. Millennials were the peak of that. Gen Zers are actually a little bit less trend forward than millennials are. Gen Zers like things that are interesting, unique, and a little wacky in some cases, but the stuff about like trying food and being a real foodie and saying, oh, I know about this ingredient or that ingredient, I want the chef-inspired or the artisan thing or the handcrafted thing, that tends to peak with millennials the most. And we've seen this consistently in lots of research we've done. There you go, chef-inspired upscale foods, millennials. Specific diet foods, something, if you're on a certain type of diet, paleo, ketogenic, more Gen Z and millennials, and meatless and plant-based option, more Gen Z and millennials as well, all within the context of a family meal.
Jack, you just flipped here. So this is going to be across all different types of dishes. Consumers have told us if they consider getting an item, right? So either delivered, to go, or dine in. So the pink here is going to be delivery, the blue is to go, and then the green is dine in. So, I think the finding, right away we see the appeal of having an item delivered is just lower than to go and dine in across the board.
Yeah, and we want to dissect these numbers a little bit further. So keep in mind what we're seeing here is how people rate the specific new menu launches that have happened in each one of these segments. They're not rating the segment overall. They're rating the 100 or so, QSR items that have launched in the last couple of months, the 100 or so fast casual items that have launched in the past couple of months. And we wanted to really dissect this a little bit further and start with the delivery numbers. So again, the numbers that we're looking at here are what is the average delivery appeal for the items launched in each one of these different types of restaurants over the course of the pandemic so far. And the thing that was incredibly striking to us is the difference between the high and the low as far as delivery goes is virtually non-existent at the segment level. Now, when you get down to the individual specific dish, like maybe there's a pizza that people think is like super deliverable, and there's, you know, an ice cream sundae, which is thought to be super undeliverable. But on average, the types of things that are being offered in various restaurant types, there's not a lot of peaks and valleys when you look at that in aggregate as it relates to, does it sound like something you would order for delivery specifically? But what if we look at some of these other ways you could have food? What if we look at to go, which are the blue ones, and we look at the highest segment in terms of average to go appeal for all the items that it's launched in the last couple of months, which is QSR, versus, you know, imagine the types of items that you'd find launched at a fine dining restaurant. People actually get, oh wow, some of these things totally make sense to take to go. Some of these things totally just don't make at all any sense to take to go. But we didn't see that nearly as much for delivery, where the variances were much, much, much smaller. For to go, the variances are huge, right? And then you have dine-in, which is in green, and you have a reasonable level of variance there as well. So think about that for a second. The perceived deliverability of different foods by segment is not thought to vary that much. But the perceived to-go appeal is really, really varied from one segment to the next. And the perceived dine-in appeal, which we see here in green, is also pretty varied. But it is to-go that has the most variability in all of this. There's something to be said about that. As consumers go out and not just get food delivered, but take things to go, the question becomes, how do we make more things that they don't think of as to-go foods feel like to-go foods? So these are those same 400 plus items that have actually launched to chains in the last couple of months. And by the type of item, what their appeal is for delivery versus to go versus dine-in. So pink is delivery, blue is to go, green is dine-in. The first thing you'll notice is that almost regardless of the item type, delivery appeal is lower across the board. The one place where it's not true are the pizzas that have launched, which totally makes sense because we think of pizza as a delivery food. For every other type of item, delivery appeal is substantially lower. And this is actually sort of interesting. Not only is delivery appeal substantially lower, but the peaks and valleys are not even that extreme, right? That pink line, other than pizza, is more or less sort of flat if you look at it. This is different than what we used to see. Back when third-party delivery was first getting started about 4 or 5 years ago, and we asked people what type of food travels well, you saw much more dramatic peaks and valleys. They would say, oh yeah, you know, wings really travel fantastic, but pancakes are really, really terrible, you know, for delivery. Here, it's all sort of flattened, where I think some people have had just poor delivery experiences overall, which has driven the entire delivery number down for almost every single category, save pizza. So that's the first thing to think about. Delivery is just not as appealing. Let's look at the other two lines, the blue one and the green one, blue for to go, green for dine-in. It's really interesting how they sort of crisscross a little bit, right? That they're not the same line whatsoever. In some ways, they almost look like mirror images in many respects. Where you see something like breakfast sandwich or non-alcoholic beverage, these are things that consumers say, oh yeah, that is totally a to-go item. Like I wouldn't even want to eat that there. That's like, you know, that's just something where the item itself, regardless of who's serving it up, that just sounds like something I should take to go. That does not sound like a thing where I should be sitting down and having it someplace else. Versus items like alcoholic beverages for obvious reasons, but also items like pasta. People say, you know what, that is an item that I need to eat at the place where it's being served, regardless of where that is. That could be at a casual dining restaurant. It could be at a QSR or fast casual. They say a pasta thing is, I gotta be there to actually eat it. Now, I would challenge you to ask yourself, why is that the case? What is it about pasta that makes it not suitable for to go? And is that something we could solve? We saw earlier just now that Italian food was one of the top things that people want to have in a family meal to go, right? But here, to go appeal for something like pasta is really, really low. This seems like an opportunity for us to sort of solve as an industry, and some other item types too, not just pastas, but you know, it could be the packaging that you put it in. It could be whether it's in a bowl format, maybe as well. It could be other things too, but what do we do to take some of these things that consumers have traditionally associated it as just sort of dine-in foods or dine-in experiences and make them to go friendly? I think that's a worthy challenge for the industry and something we should all undertake together. If we're going to be at 50% capacity in dining rooms for a while, let's find a way to take some of those delicious things that people love and offer them up in other ways that people see as reasonable to go options too.